Welcome back. Saving the futures of juvenile offenders, a diversion program instead of jail. But do Black and Hispanic kids get that same chance as often as white kids? Last year, here on the Suncoast and across the state, 45% of young white offenders were sent to diversion programs after being arrested, compared to only 39% of those who are Black and 16% of those who are Hispanic. In Manatee County, the disparity is even greater, with 56% of white youngsters getting the chance to go into those programs, but only 32% of Black kids and 12% of Hispanic youth. And in Sarasota, a whopping 66% of white juvenile offenders were referred to diversion programs, but only 22% of Black juvenile offenders and 10% of Hispanic youth. Joining us for more is Ruth Beltran with the Manatee County NAACP, Andrea Mogensen, a civil rights attorney, and Lee Howarth, a retired judge for the Florida 12th Circuit Court. Thank you very much for coming back, Your Honor.
Thank you for having us.
You know, this is an important issue, and I want to try to get to the numbers of the numbers, but why? What do you all think is behind it? You know, obviously in Adam's piece there was discussion about inherent racism. Your Honor, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'd look a little bit further beyond the civil citation. A civil citation is a referral by law enforcement to a program. Typically it's teen court or the Jewish Family and Children Services. But even if a child is not directed to a civil citation program, he or she in the justice system will have an opportunity to prove themselves before they start getting the record that is of such concern for them as an adult. So it's not like you don't get into civil citation, you're going to automatically be tracked through the system. There's other ways, and quite frankly, the huge majority of the people do not get to the point where they're tracked in the adult system.
So in order to make those numbers, you had to be basically a repeat offender to be charged criminally.
Absolutely, and the Department of Juvenile Justice has an instrument called a Risk Assessment Instrument, CPAC or RPAC, just don't ask me what it stands for, but it is a way to assess the risk of this individual child, and it's race neutral. So it's hard for me to explain why there'd be a disparity.
Andrea, in Adam's story there was an insinuation that part of the problem is the public defender system, because a lot of the public defenders have very large caseloads and they can't maybe put in the individualized attention into each case, like, you know, a young white kid who may have a private attorney paid for by their parents.
Well, I don't think any blame is properly placed on the public defender's office there, because they do have a significant number of cases. They get a vast amount of experience and are best able to evaluate one case versus another as far as outcome, and they certainly are thoroughly familiar with the mores. We have an outstanding public defender's office in this community, and I don't think that's where blame is properly resting for this particular disparity.
You know, Ruth, the NAACP says they're not surprised by this, that they have seen these numbers for years. It's just getting the attention now because we decided to look into it. In your opinion, is racism at what level a part of the issue? And if it's not just racism, what else is it?
Okay. So there's something interesting happening all around the nation, where we continue to pull data that shows racial disparities and bias and racial bias against Black, Latino, and brown communities. And we continue to create excuses, right? We could pull data from arrests, from stops, from people who are, like now, diverted into other programs that will be beneficial for them after they have made a mistake. And we continue to see the data that shows the racial bias. And we continue to create excuses instead of calling it for what it is. In this nation, we have institutionalized racism. Racism lives in every fiber of our society, and this is the way that it reflects itself. In places where we may not be looking, in places that is hidden, is not so obvious to the eye, but once we see that, we need to address it for what it is.
But let me ask you to respond to something that the judge said, which is that in order to be eventually get to the point that you are charged, you have to be a frequent flyer in some ways. So is that part of the issue?
Well, we cannot negate that the civil citations in the diversion programs do create an opportunity, right? An opportunity that is not given equally to Black and brown communities. So whether or not once they get into the system they still have to be a frequent flyer, that first opportunity of a civil citation or the racial program should be allowed for all citizens. It should be allowed for all the communities equally, and that is not what we are seeing here.
We have less than a minute left in this segment, but is the issue here something that is generally acknowledged in the legal community and in the courts, that there is something to this?
The problem that I see, Alan, is there is no metric. In other words, if you were to ask a state attorney or a public defender, is this child being treated differently? They have no way to know that, because we've not been given in the judicial branch or the clerks or the state attorneys the instruments that we need to record
like
that.
What?
Well, they need to find out how many blacks were given a different referral, what was their sentencing, what was their disposition, and that needs to be done through a data system that does not exist.
All right, we are only getting started with this discussion. We're going to talk about the racial disparity on the Suncoast when it comes to civil citations, but first, let's get a check on our weather, so stay with us. Welcome back. If you're just joining us, we're talking about racial disparity when it comes to civil citations across the state. And here on the Suncoast, our guests tonight are Ruth Beltran with the Manatee County NAACP, Andrea Mogensen, a civil rights attorney, and Lee Howarth, a retired judge for Florida's 12th Circuit Court. Your Honor, you were talking about the need for more data. I mean, we see the numbers in terms of the arrests and civil citations. So exactly what kind of data do you need to see?
I think you need to collect information from various sources. For example, the major stakeholders are the state attorney, the public defender, and the clerk, together with the court, because those are the people that are generating the sentences. Those are the ones that are proposing the dispositions. The court, of course, has a role to play, but those are the key players, and without tracking that information through some database, you're not going to get reliable information.
So where is it, where are these numbers coming from? Ruth, you've talked about that you believe that there is racism inherent in the system. Is it fair what the judge is saying in terms of we need to see where this is going off the rails in the legal system?
So we continue to pull data from many different systems within the judicial system, and data such as the one that you just showed. You just showed the numbers, and those are the numbers that reflect where the disparity is. We need actual legislation to change that. We need to take away...
What would you like to see changed?
We need to take away the power from the police officer to pick and choose who he or she gives a citation to. We need to make it even, so that there are certain standards that they have to follow. So this person gets a citation across the board, regardless of the color of their skin. And that's where we need to address. That way, you will see a change in the numbers of more whites getting civil citations while more blacks get arrested.
Andrea?
Anytime there's room for discretion, and there is a lot of room for discretion in the executive branch, which is law enforcement, there's a lot of room for discretion in the judicial branch. But in this particular context, more of the discretion is, in my view, with law enforcement. And so anytime there's room for discretion, there's room for bias. And when you look at data and look at numbers, these are complicated situations. There's too many moving parts. It's very difficult in the criminal justice system to compare apples to apples. So I think what both of my colleagues here on the panel are saying is true. On the one hand, we do need more data. We need to make sure we're looking at apples to apples when we're looking at data. And on the other hand, if there's a reduction in discretion for certain types of offenses and certain types of histories, because remember, in the previous decades, there was a time where law enforcement and the criminal justice system was not involved when a kid got into a fight at school or, sprayed spray paint and did criminal mischief. Now we involve the government and the criminal justice system very, very early and very often. And I don't think a good argument can be made that in so doing we've created more responsible adults. What we've done is branded kids early, and we've just got to be real careful when we do that.
But it is also true that there are youngsters who are getting into significant trouble with and are involved in organized activities which law enforcement is aware of and may have, through their investigations, know who is part of a larger group that is causing trouble, and those police officers may be less likely to offer that kind of repeat offender a civil citation or a diversion program.
Well, if you're talking about significant crime, you're probably not talking about a diversion program anyway. If it's a violent, harmful crime, if it's a significant criminality, if we're talking about felonies, we're not talking about diversion in any case. When we're talking about diversion, we're talking about first-time offenders and lower-level offenses and opportunities for people to make a different choice. But if a crime is too serious and threatens the community too much, diversion won't be under discussion.
You know, I'm still unclear from the three of you where the real onus is on this, because is it fair to only blame law enforcement? And we had the interview in Adam's story with someone from the sheriff's office who says, look, if you come to us and show that somebody that we arrested deserves a civil citation or diversion program and not a criminal charge, we will look at that. So,
but is that practical? At the time, after the arrest happens, a kid just goes through the system. A lot of times, parents are unaware that that is an option, that they can come back and speak to the sheriff. You know, so you have to think about things that are practical once someone has been arrested. The common person is not going to think that even speaking to the sheriff is an option and that it will help their case in any ways. Because after that, after arrest, then the judicial system is where the person is moved to. So that is really not practical to say. The common person doesn't know that. That's not an option that they are going to explore at all.
Your Honor, what do you think?
Well, I think it's going to be a hard sell to get legislation that removes that discretion from law enforcement. The law enforcement folks I've spoken to want to have the right to identify people that have a serious history, youthful offenders, may not be charged with a serious crime, but may have a very serious drug habit or involvement with gangs, and they want to be able to have the opportunity to refer that person to a more appropriate setting. If the statute passes that's been proposed, law enforcement has been saying we'll have to send very serious criminals through basically a useless system because civil citation is not an effective remedy.
Ruth, I see you're shaking your head here, but to the judge's point, let's say you do have a young individual who may, in terms of their past arrests or their encounters with the police, not on the most serious of cases that otherwise would be open them to a civil citation, but police do know that they're involved with gang activity, and you know you got to put a stop to that. What do you do?
So I read the actual bill that is proposed, and there are limits. This is not going to be you get arrested 30 times and each time you get a civil citation or sent into the diversion program. That is not what we are talking about. And just like Andrea said, we are not talking about serious crimes, right? Heinous crimes. We do need to remove that. You know, with the rights come responsibility. So law enforcement would like to have that discretion and continue to have that discretion. However, they don't want to be held accountable for that, right? Because we just saw the sheriff say, if they come and speak to me, I will change it, which we know that is not practical. So if you want the right, then you need to be held responsible for when you give more civil citations to the white youth and not to the black communities. When you offer them better chances that will have a great impact in their lives. Just think about the impact that an arrest has in in the life of a kid, right? So if you want to continue to have the discretion, then you need to be held responsible. And when we pull data, such as the data that has just been pulled, then we are going to need answers.
I'm curious what, Andrea, what you and your colleagues see in the system. I mean, you're the one who's going into court every day, and you see whether it's the white youngster, the Hispanic, or the African-American youngster, or whatever. Just from your experience, are you seeing differences in how they are treated in the courts?
Well, to a degree, because one of the things that isn't really talked about in this context is that law enforcement agencies have a greater opportunity, just that besides whether we give a citation or make an arrest, but also geographically where they're looking for criminality and where they're intervening. And when there's a focus or an emphasis on particular neighborhoods of color, where they spend more time there, when they spend more time observing there, those kids are going to build up records faster because the kids over here in this other neighborhood that may be having the same conduct are not being observed doing it.
But you know what the folks at home are saying to the television right now? Police go where the crime is. If they are getting reports of things happening in a certain part of the city, that's where resources are going to be going.
Well, the studies have shown, like for example, as far as drug usage, it's the same for whites, blacks, and Hispanics. The numbers of kids that are smoking marijuana are the same no matter what race, no matter what socioeconomic level they are. That's what the studies show. So why are kids, in particular in poor communities, or in communities of color, picking up more citations.
Your Honor, I want to give you the last word here.
Well, I think cops chase the crime, and I'm not an expert on it, but I think police officers sit around and say, where's the crime occurring? They draw a zone and they say, we're going to focus our resources on that area. They may not be in Harbor Acres or Cherokee Park. It may be some part of North Sarasota City, and that's where they go.
All right. Ruth, I see you're shaking your head
That
again.
is so
Hold
not
on one
true.
second. We are taking a quick break, and we will return for final thoughts from our guest tonight. Plus, what some of our viewers are saying about last night's topic, the LGBT movement in Sarasota. Stay with us. Welcome back. In Manatee and Sarasota counties, if you are white and you get into trouble with the law, you are likely to be offered a civil citation as a youngster, more likely than if you are black or Hispanic. Our guest right now join us for final thoughts. And Ruth, you have a lot to say.
Yes, I do. It is not true that the police officers chase crime. They do not. Historically, we have seen that they do chase black and brown communities, and they do observe and arrest. And the data shows all the disproportion, everything that is negative regarding the police department and the black and brown communities. And this is what this data is showing, the same exact thing. We really need to just stop looking at the data, which is right in front of our faces, and stop the state of denial and continuing to say that it's not racism when it is right in our faces. The data has shown that black men are even punished to longer sentences, and that these sentences are approved by both the prosecutor and the judges, and everybody's playing with people's lives, is playing the blame game with people's lives. It's not my fault, it's not this fault. In the meantime, there are hundreds and thousands of lives being lost, black and brown lives in particular.
Andrea, is it the part of the problem, the judiciary, from the judges to the prosecutors to the defense attorneys?
I don't see it in the judiciary. I think one thing that it's important for us to remember is we're talking about kids here. And when you talk about police chasing crime and whatnot, if children are being picked up in high crime communities for low-level offenses, because as I mentioned before, diversion is not being offered to people who are committing felonies or crimes of violence or things of that nature. It's for low-level offenses, kid stuff. Those are the kids that are most important to reach with diversion if they're in communities where they're not necessarily getting support from their families, etc.
Your Honor, I want to give you the last word. What's the answer here, or part of the answer?
I wish I had a definitive answer, but let me give you some ideas of how we can improve this. First off, we need more minorities in law enforcement. We don't have a good representation of minorities in law enforcement. Secondly, we could have a closer collaboration between the schools, Department of Juvenile Justice, and the courts to stop this, what we call the prison, the school to prison pipeline. That's very important. And third, you know, a lot of these kids who are acting out were subject to trauma as young kids. Adverse childhood experiences are affecting them, going off like time bombs. Between 0 and 3, they've been traumatized. They get to middle school or even elementary school, and they act out. We need to be more effective in addressing the parents' needs to get them nurturing and know how to do good parenting.
All right, thank you all. But before we go, we want to share with you what some of our viewers are saying about last night's topic, the LGBT movement on the Suncoast. The fight for equality is being highlighted all this week with ABC's miniseries, When We Rise, a program about the struggle for LGBT rights here on the Suncoast. Some say the legacy of bias still exists, and we ask you what you think of the current status of LGBT rights. Ivan Moyer writes, gays won the right to marry. Let's leave it there. The whole transgender garbage is ridiculous, and we should not waste any time or money on the argument. There are more important things politicians should be spending their time on. Wow. Sally Barker writes in response, well, that is your opinion, but they are just like you, human, and they have the right to live freely just like you and I. But see, that is the problem. Everyone judges them for what they want to be and not accepting them for who they really are. Ellen Poser writes, everybody needs to be treated equally. No one deserves special treatment. However, keep men out of the ladies' room and vice versa. Well, what do you think about tonight's topic? Let us know by visiting our Facebook page at facebook.com/news@7. And FYI, want to watch past Roundtable discussions? They're available on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Roku. Thanks to our guests for being here tonight. Ruth Beltran is with the Manatee County NAACP. Andrea Mogensen is a civil rights attorney. And Lee Howarth is a retired judge for Florida's 12th Circuit Court.